Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Food System Horizons webinar. It is 12:01, and we might get started with this session. Today, we are going to be talking about transformation of systems and how we learn through them. And we're really pleased to have some wonderful speaker and a panel part of this sort of session today. Before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the oh, hang on a second, we're still accepting people. Just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we host this webinar. Today we're hosting it from two places, here in Meanjin in Brisbane, where the Yagara and Turrbal peoples are, and in Canberra, where Andy is, Andy Hall, who's co-hosting with me today, which is the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Spring has sprung, and as we know, I like to acknowledge that this changing of the seasons and how Indigenous peoples use the changing of the seasons and all the signals that are set through that way as part of knowing what food is available. Over here in Brisbane, you start to hear the Pacific Coal, which are migratory birds, and they create a raucous, and they definitely wake you up in the morning. It's definitely a sign of seasons changing. Today, we're going to be talking about those changing systems, transformative change, really, and how we enable that through learning. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Enayat Moallemi. Enayat is a principal research scientist here at CSIRO, Agriculture and Food, and he uses modeling tools and knowledge co-production methods to design and evaluate decisions for sustainability transitions.
That's a really
good way. And somebody's not on mute.
Well, actually, turned out to be just.
There you go. All good. It's okay. It happens. Hi, Sarah. And Enayat approaches research questions with a holistic view, which is really important for systems and complex systems such as food systems that we're dealing with. He actually uses a wide range of methodologies to actually look into how complexities how we can take change through complex systems. We have two panel members who are going to be we're welcoming today, Cain. Hi, Karen. Gonna give us a wave. Karen has significant senior experience working across government, leading strategic innovation and developing and implementing policy in the public sector. Her experience is in developing and delivering on issues that reflect what matters to community and government, and this has led to her appointment as Chief Executive Officer of the Latrobe Valley Authority, which she held from 2017 to 2021. Karen is now partnering with agencies to address fair, just, and sustainable transition practice in regional Australia, a really important part as our regions transition from different systems to another. And we welcome Karen today, and we're looking forward to hearing all about what your work. Another panelist we have is Costanza Conti. Costanza Conti is a food systems researcher with over 8 years of experience working across global and regional programs to understand how interventions can enable just, inclusive, and sustainable system change. Costanza is with the M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation in India, MSSRF, and I had the pleasure of working with MSSRF long ago in my first international work in India in Chennai. So it's nice to see you, Costanza. Welcome. And of course, my co-host, who you guys know, Andy Hall. Andy is Senior Principal Research Scientist at CSIRO and resident guru of Food System Horizons. No introductions necessary. He hates that too. But anyway, I'll let us keep going, and I'll pass on to Enayat. Enayat, over to you. I'll spotlight to you, and let's learn about what systems change requires.
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen and move this one.
I think it's right. Looks right.
Okay, so you see the presentation mode, right?
Yes.
All right, great. Thanks, Lily, for the very kind introduction, and also thanks everyone for joining this session. Yeah, of course, it's a pleasure to be in one of the Food System Horizon seminars. The topic that we have for this session, enabling transformative change through systems learning, represents a portfolio of work that we have been developing in the past couple of years, at least the last 3 years. So it's definitely not my work alone. It's more of a collective effort from our team with many valuable inputs also from our partners and collaborators, and also with different funding and supports coming through different sources. So I just wanted to make that acknowledgement at the beginning. I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which I'm joining this session today, the Wurundjeri people of Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and future. Maybe let's just start from here that as we all know, our agri-food systems deliver significant economic values. They are also important for many other reasons, for food security, for environmental management on farms. But despite their good performance, there are still many who believe that our agri-food systems needs to also change and evolve over time. The argument that they have is that they need to change and evolve in response to some of the pressing challenges that they face. Things like climate change, things like biodiversity loss, or health concerns. The change that we also argue for agri-food system also seems to be necessary in the face of some of the emerging opportunities where our agri-food systems could play an important role in the future. For example, the role that agri-food could have in achieving net zero goals, for example, through low carbon liquid fuels, or the role that they could have in supporting local economy through agrotourism, or the role of agriculture in supporting energy transition through agrophotovoltaics, and perhaps many other examples of opportunities that we can think of. So given this necessity and also relevance of change for our agri-food systems, there are currently many science policy initiatives trying to argue and guide how our agri-food system should change and evolve in response to these challenges and opportunities. There are many examples, both nationally and internationally. Nationally, obviously, we had the State of Food System report earlier this year, Australia's food system roadmap. And if we go international, we can think of many examples, including the EU Farm to Fork strategies, the UN Food System Summits, and obviously IPCC and IPBES also always have a strong focus on agriculture, food, and land. Across most of these science policy initiatives, there is more and more a common understanding and also an increasing acknowledgement that when we talk about agri-food system change, this agri-food system change is going to be complex and uncertain. And because of this complexity and uncertainty, there is no pre-specified or deterministic pathway that could exactly predict how these systems would change and how these changes would unfold in the long-term future. They argue that it's important instead to have approaches that could work at a system level so that they could better recognize and acknowledge the interconnectedness that our agri-food systems have across their value chains, but also in interactions with other systems like energy, water, land, climate. And also they recognize also the value of approaches that could better deal with deep uncertainties, including all the supply and demand shocks and the disruptions that could happen along the food supply chain. This acknowledgement of uncertainty and complexity is also very much in line with basic definitions that we have in the scientific literature. It's not only limited to the international or national agendas. As one example, if you look at the Sustainability Transition Research Network, which is one of these scientific communities, they define transition as the navigation of highly complex and open processes with uncertain outcomes. Political science calls it modeling through, which basically refers to a pragmatic, incremental approach to a step-by-step change based on trial and error and based on learning. And again, if you look at the scientific literature, you will find many similar discussions which basically argue when our knowledge is complex and uncertain, experts should avoid simplifying their advice. And they highlight the role that complexity-aware and also adaptive and robust approaches to deep uncertainty could play in our agri-food system change. So I guess in line with this stream of both policy and scientific literature that I introduced, what some of my colleagues and I have been doing in the past few years was to develop and test a new approach. We have been systematically collecting, analyzing, and also documenting learnings from a large number of empirical experiments and also place-based case studies around the world in order to develop some evidence-based guidelines for agri-food system change. We call the approach that we have systems learning because it uses learning by doing and learning by action as a distinctive way of creating change-making capacity in our agri-food system so that they would be able to better anticipate some of these future complex challenges and also be able to design interventions or strategies that would be adaptive and could evolve over time in response to uncertainties that we have. There's a series of foundational pieces, let's say, that we have written to basically explain what a system learning approach means and where it comes from. There's a range of frameworks and processes that explain how we can put this systems learning approach into practice and apply it in our projects. And through these works, we have also created databases from these empirical cases, which could provide access to rich source of information for everyone. So what I would probably do now is to give you a quick overview of each of these aspects in the next couple of slides. In terms of the foundation, I would say there are three main theoretical pillars that underpin our systems learning approach. The first one is the idea of learning in actions and learning by doing and bridging the gap between the knowledge of what needs to change in our agri-food system and also how we can make that change happen on the ground. This learning by actions or learning by doing or covering the gap between theory and practice is not probably anything new. It has come up many times in the previous literature under different terms. For example, in 1990s, it was introduced as post-normal science. Later, people refer to it with other terms. For example, they call it pluralistic or action-oriented knowledge for sustainability. And I guess perhaps more recently, the way that we call it was a theory to practice shortcut and a way to basically leapfrog the steep learning curve of transition. The Second pillar is about the need for adopting our interventions and strategies when we are facing a deeply uncertain future, which is basically coming from the idea that all transitions, including agri-food system change, are going to be messy and unpredictable. And there is no way that we can pre-specify or fully engineer their future trajectories. And the best we could do is to have incremental step-by-step change based on the monitoring and also learning from our surrounding environment and as we go forward. Similar to the first pillar, this idea has been also discussed previously in the literature. For example, there's a specific scientific community of research that emerged in the RAND corporations in the US in early 1990s, working specifically on the topic of deep uncertainty. The socio-ecological system research has talked extensively about the management of uncertainty under global change. And again, perhaps in our more recent time, we contributed a piece that defines the role of uncertainty, specifically in the context of food system transformation. And last but not least is the pillar about the role of local experiments, place-based initiatives in supporting broader national and international agendas as a way to scale the lessons and insights that we have on the ground, and also as a way to avoid imposing a one-size-fits-all implementation of these broader agendas. Again, similar to the previous two pillars, the role of local initiatives in supporting the higher scale ambition has been also discussed in the previous literature. I would say less in the context of food system transformations, but much more in other contexts, like how local initiatives could support the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Agreement and so on. Based on these foundational pillars, we have developed a range of frameworks and processes, as I mentioned, to basically put this idea of systems learning into practice and to guide our agri-food system change, but also beyond agri-food, for example, our net zero transitions. So one example of this framework is the entry point frameworks that we have, which is, if I want to put it in a simple term, is a catalog of different approaches and perspectives to sustainability transitions across a range of sectors, including in agri-food. So the framework was developed based on a meta-analysis of a large number of empirical cases related to transitions, transformations in different parts of the world. And then a synthesis of recurring approaches that these empirical case studies have to transitions. So we call each of these recurring approaches an entry point. We identified 9 of these entry points, and we discussed 27 ways that these 9 entry points could be implemented. And then we categorized them under 3 main themes, as you can see in the graphics on the right-hand side. Another example of the framework is the scaffolding for defining actor roles in food system transformations, a work led by my colleague Costanza Conti. I'm sure she would probably refer to this during the panel discussion, and she would explain it much better than me. But as a bit of a context behind the background, when we were looking at empirical cases of food system transformations, we realized that there are different roles for actors in different places. Some of these case studies have a more of a kind of a top-down approach where transformation is led by, let's say, government or public organizations. Whereas on the other hand, there are also cases that are more or primarily bottom-up, led by communities and also implemented in a highly context-specific way. But when you look closer at these empirical case study, you will realize that there's no black and white, and there's no pure top-down or a pure bottom-up approach, and these two don't happen in silos. they interact, and the interactions that they have also change and evolve over time. So what we did was basically, again, a meta-analysis of a large number of empirical cases related to food system transformations to map the pattern of interactions between top-down and bottom-up, and provide a guideline for actor participations in food system change. And there are other examples of frameworks and processes that you would be certainly welcome to have a look at the end of this session. So as I mentioned earlier, what underpins these frameworks and our systems learning approach as a whole is a large number of empirical case studies, which we have been collecting, analyzing, and documenting in the past few years. One last thing that we did was we have created databases from these empirical cases, which could provide access to an inventory of examples for many different equally valid ways that our agri-food systems could change and unfold in the future. So these databases are important for a variety of reasons. Obviously, they provide access to information for everyone, which is, I think, valuable on its own. But through providing access to information, I think they also help to raise awareness and show why a system change matters based on concrete evidence, based on real stories, based on tangible examples. And I think through these real stories, the kind of a longer term vision or hope is that they could also help build trust and perhaps turn, if there's any skepticism, to more of a support and advocacy. There are, again, examples of these databases. For example, there's a database of 60 different cases of transitions, transformations in different sectors, including in agri-food, in different scale of analysis, local, national, international, in different countries around the world. Another example of databases is work that my colleague Zalal Muti has been doing, putting together a database of 67 empirical cases of scaling agri-food system innovation in relation to different areas: agroecology, conservation, ag, climate resilience, farming, again, in different parts of the world. Another example is what my colleague Michelle Miller has been doing, a database of 35 different empirical cases of how transition design has been practiced, and also insights from approaches, challenges, and innovations that happen in practice on the ground in different places. And again, other example of these databases that you are certainly welcome to have a look at the end of this session. So I guess just to summarize, as I mentioned earlier, and I repeat it again, I think system learning is a way of building change-making capacity in our agri-food system. It's a way of designing a more of adaptive approaches and complexity-aware responses in our food system transformation. And because of that, I think it's an opportunity for us to use system learning to understand and make sense of often very broad and ambitious vision of food system transformations we have, with specific examples from diverse geographies, which could be perhaps more relatable to people. And I guess by better utilizing the power of case studies and empirical evidence, system learning approach is also an opportunity for us, researchers and practitioners, to ideally avoid the reinvention of a wheel in our food system transformation domain, and instead focus more on learning from a wealth of information that exists out there, a wealth of empirical information, and try to learn what has worked and what hasn't, in many examples of success and failure stories that we have out there. And with that, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Enayat. And I've just I've just added the link to chat on the case studies in your brilliant project webpage, which contains all the databases. It's a beast of a webpage, everyone. It's all there. And I'll hand over to Andy to run the panel.
Okay, thanks very much, Lily. I'm just wondering if Costanza's with us. I can't see her face anywhere.
Yeah. Andy, you have not been able to see me since the starting of the meeting, but I've been here all along.
Very good.
Can you see me now?
No, just checking. All right, let me just say a few words, because that's quite a lot of information that Enayat's presented. And just to, full disclosure, I'm a co-conspirator in this work of thinking about how learning and case studies can be used to accelerate practice and policy towards food system transformation. And I guess, we all have a personal history. One of my personal histories is a lifetime in project land. And in project land, we tend to bury our dead. And in other words, what I mean by that is we do projects, get to the end of them, take a deep breath, and then do another one without ever reflecting on what works and what doesn't. So we don't do this accumulation of lessons about what works and what doesn't. We tend to tell success stories which perpetuate the framing that we have about how the world works, rather than really reassessing how things actually happen. And I think that need to continuously learn and navigate this really quite difficult world that we live in is going to become increasingly important. So I'm definitely a co-conspirator, and I think these things are really important. But then, of course, a gentleman of a certain age also asks the question about our science and its applicability. How can we use these ideas, which, like all good innovations, are a repackaging of a number of existing ideas? How can we actually use these to bridge between the research understanding of how the world's working and the practice of people who are on the front line of food systems transformation, be that at a community level, at a business level, or as a policy level? So I think that's really the tenor of the questions that I'm going to throw to our panel, really about how do we move from great ideas into the practical application of these ideas. And I'm going to start by throwing Costanza under the bus, since she hid from us for the first part of the meeting. So Costanza, you've worked in both the kind of global sphere. You've worked in the Eat Lancet Commission report on food systems transformation. And you've also more recently been working in a non-profit research foundation that seeks to scale food systems innovation. So you have this sort of research and practice role at a global and at a national level in India. How do you think this systems learning and case study approach could have added value to the work of the Eat Lancet Commission, which we know had its challenges? And how do you think it could help in your current and future work in the research foundation that you work in India?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And Enayat, thanks for the great presentation. Just wanted to, say it was really good to see all this body of work coming together. So I would like to start my reply with an acknowledgement that both in my previous body of work and in my current one, there is a general sense of unease when we talk about case studies, because, the usual criticism is that case studies are not generalizable. Case studies only reflect like one particular reality. So, and there is this sense of unease that sort of percolated both in my Eat Lancet Commission work, and even right now, though I'm working with a much more implementation-oriented organization, when you mention, oh, that I'm going to do case studies, people tend to not be particularly keen initially. And actually, what Enayat's work has revealed, and what part of mine and Andy's work as well as shed light on, is that what really matters, like usually we look at case studies to see, how certain innovations can be scaled. And we tend to look at 1, 2, maximum 3 case studies generally. But actually, I think what changes is whether we look at how many case studies we look, and that can really give us a different picture. And second, what do we look at in our case studies? So I'll give you an example. So currently I'm working with MSSRF, and MSSRF has a broad portfolio of projects working across agriculture, climate, health, many different things. But still, when we do case study report, like donor reports, annual reports, general paper, academic paper writing, we look at single innovation. So we would look at a particular technology or a particular intervention and how it has succeeded. Which is not wrong, right? Because we generate evidence on like portfolios of innovations that could help us achieve food system transformation, healthier diet, etc. And this is very much common with the Eat Lancet work as well. We looked at a lot of different innovations that could help shift to more sustainable and healthy food system. However, what I have learned from working with Enayat, working with you, Andy, is that it might be much more interesting to look at to take a bit of a different lens and look at how case studies actually deal, with uncertainty. How do they engage with emerging circumstances? How do they navigate these processes of change that, as Enayat told us, are like very complex and very uncertain. So, and we don't have many ways to actually unpack this question, that how do you navigate complex change? One way is surely a theoretical way, which I mean helpful for giving framing, but not very much for practical application. But what is more interesting is that the case like analyzing big databases of case studies, and I think Enayat, your webpage is like incredible for that, can reveal very different things on how change happens. So, for example, Enayat, you mentioned my paper on top-down and bottom-up patterns of interactions, and it's a big systematic review of 40+ case studies across the globe. And what I was initially expecting was that I would have to analyze the data geographically, saying that, in some geographical areas, we see certain patterns versus certain other patterns in other geographies. But actually, what the case study work revealed, and that is the power of case studies, is that patterns were very much the same in different contexts, and they produced similar outcomes based on the interactions, no matter where the case studies were taking place. So, to come to the final point, I would say that both for my work with the Eat Lancet, which was very global in nature and it's a very ambitious project, but maybe what could be a scope for the next commission is to conduct a much broader investigation on how to engage with complex change, and like what type of evidence do we need. And even in my current work with MSSRF, we still focus very much on single project outcomes and eventually impacts. But, what if instead we looked at how can we change like project trajectories in case unexpected circumstances emerge? How could we build the right coalitions of factors so that, if the project is derailed or if something is not going as per the preferences of the local people, then we can shift that. And I think overall, it's easy for me to say that we just need to look at different through a different lens at case studies, or we need to look at more case studies. But I think this requires a bigger reframing of what we do as scientists and what type of questions we ask, but also what type of questions is our institutions or even our organizations interested in. You know, what are donors funding? Do they fund projects that deal with uncertainty, or do they fund projects that deal with a single innovation?
Can I just ask you a quick follow-up question, and can you answer it briefly? And it's quite a tricky one. You won't remember this, but 20 years ago, we were all talking about being learning organizations. It all came out of the management literature that we'd continuously learn and improve our performance. What do you think the barriers are to that in an implementation organization like yours? And what do you think would help people become more comfortable with that, in brief?
Yeah, so first is the capacity, like individual capacities that scientists have. Currently, not many of my colleagues, and this I said with the utmost respect for them, sort of accept that if the project is not producing the right outcomes, it's also a good thing for learning, and we can just readjust accordingly. So I think it's a perception of our honor or pride as scientists that we have to deliver on certain things, and that might need to be changed. And second is what institutionally is desired, so this means, for example, what gets funded. Do we still get funded if we don't promote a success story of like single entry point intervention? Do we still get our funding if we say, oh, our intervention was set to do this, but there were unexpected things that came up, and so we readjusted the course, and then now it's doing slightly different things. So I think these are the two main barriers.
Okay, thanks very much. So there's a cultural barrier into moving into this learning by doing world that is related to funding imperatives. Yeah. We're going to shift gears. Thanks very much, Costanza. That's great. We're going to shift gears now. We're going to talk to Karen Cain. Now, Karen, you've kind of almost worked on the other end of the spectrum. You've had leadership and senior policy positions in the public sector, and have got deep experience of the transition process and navigating this interface between community, industry, and policy. What do you think the role is of this systems learning and case study approach in supporting the work of policy leaders and communities navigating these transitions? Where does it fit into your world? How does it help you on Monday morning?
Look, thanks, Andy, and thanks for the opportunity to be involved in this great discussion. I've just put down appetite for the unknown as what I cut out of Constanza's discussion there, and public policy struggles with that because there are policy, there are requirements for government to operate. I think it's about what you can demonstrate in terms of outcome. So being able to demonstrate practical reality and for communities to be talking about the benefit to them, and I'm going to talk a lot about benefit, and for that to come through to policy is really where we've got to go to, because government will react, public policy will react if there are real outcomes for communities across our country, and particularly in regional areas. As we know, we're moving into a focus on the regions in terms of the climate question. But I want to give you an example of some work that I've been involved in where a government department has taken the risk and been supported to think differently about how we operate. So I was director of forestry transition in Victoria for 2 years, and I no longer have that role, but I got 2 years to implement and put in place a very different way of working around thinking about transition and communities. So I have also been working with RMIT, the Centre of EU Excellence, for the last 6 years, and the transition question around what does contemporary regional development look like came out of the transition question. So how do we set up regions for the future? How do we build their capacity, capability? How do we build the systems within a region to make sure that that long-term transformation and transition is as strong as it can be? That work came out of research through the EU around smart specialisation and a really strong evidence base about how we might think about that in Australia. So applying that to the region of Gippsland in Victoria and through the forestry transition work at a much more localised level was funded. So 11 sites across Victoria, 11 communities that were going to be impacted by a forestry transition. So that's timber harvesting in native forests is now no longer exists here, legislated for that not to occur. A big shift for communities reliant on that economic input. So this is about what sort of conditions can you set up at a local level to work directly with those communities to think about over 4 years what their future is going to look like. So putting in place support for 4 years and taking an approach on working directly, regularly, every day in those communities with some support to understand, to go through a process of context analysis, discovery of what's already happening in that community, working and setting up a governance arrangement where people in that community come together to explore and to be supported to explore their future, and then start to really dig deep into the economic, social and environmental opportunities around the future for these communities. I haven't got time to go into the detail of that now, but we have been monitoring that and for the last 4 years. And I'm currently involved with RMIT in going back and examine the progress over that time. So the two things that come out of the research in the EU around regional development, successful regional development is around the governance arrangements, but institutional capability and the willingness for us to be comfortable with exploration and understanding what's possible and testing that with an evidence base about decision making about future decisions. So we're currently having a look at one site at the moment in Victoria, and we've undertaken we're doing research at the moment about the mapping, the system mapping associated with that, and an agricultural focus is one of those areas. So we're out on farms, we are talking to business owners, we're using the entry points that Enayat described earlier on to try and understand the complexity of what's going on. And it's everything from, product innovation, research, climate conditions, supply chain, employment, innovation, market distribution. We're having a look at the whole system across direct businesses and analysing that in a way which tells us what are the risk points at this point, what are the opportunities, and how is that system operating in a location. And some of these businesses are international businesses, so it really is going deep to understand the detail of this around understanding where that work has got to.
Can I just sort of push you on a little point? I'm keeping a close eye on the time because I want to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. So if you could answer this one in brief. I'm picking up from both of our panelists a point about capacity building, that if we're going to use this more evidence-based, learning-oriented, navigational approach to transitions, whether that's forestry or food or whatever, we need to build up capacity, and that capacity needs to be both at the community level and the policy level. But I'm also picking up, Karen, that the notion of a case study might be less about writing kind of an extractive document about what's happening, and might be more about enabling a process for people to build up their own case study. So it's a process rather than a product. Could you talk briefly to that? Because I think that's quite important in terms of how this is implemented. You know, is this a extractive research process, or is it a more process facilitation process?
It's certainly about process, and it is about having, you know, public policy right through to local government, through to local communities, and on businesses directly involved in that spectrum. And this is about what is the legacy of how you get people to work together over time, and continue to do that beyond, you know, any incentives or funding incentives, so that you're building a legacy of that will continue. So these businesses now are working together on waste. They're working on skill development of the workforce. They're sharing transport. There's a whole system operating now where there's a way of working that is getting the greater good out of the individual organisations and businesses, and that is already in place, and that's going to continue. So it's about what are we observing, and the evidence that we've got about the sustainability of the way people are working. I think that's very important, and being able to provide a framework of the sorts of things we need to pay attention to, and the governance arrangements that they're going to have in place for the long term here. So we went from a community who were split down the middle, where there was no trust, no relationship, significant issues, under pressure, to an amazing set of arrangements now that we're now trying to start to tell the story, and how can you scale this up? So now starting to have a look at what that might look like on a regional level as well. Yep.
Right. Thanks very much, Karen. We haven't talked to the scaling point, but I suspect that it's a broader and more important discussion as well. And now, do you want to say one or two words before we throw it open to broader questions?
Yeah, sure.
I can see you've got a hand up.
Yes, yeah. So I was just going to thank both Costanza and Karen for the reflection. I just wanted to mention two things in relation to the points that the panel made. So Costanza mentioned that it's important how we do the case studies, and basically the number of case studies that we look at could also significantly shift the type of insights that we get out of this empirical evidence. And that's a very, I think, interesting point to think of. One of the like a common questions that I have come across previously was that like we are talking about database of empirical cases, but if you just like simply search on Google Scholar, like case studies of food system transformations, you may also end up with, like, I don't know, thousands of different cases or empirical evidences or papers or anything. So what's the kind of a point here, or what is the kind of innovation? And I think the innovation is in how you make sense of the complexity of the content of these case studies, because that's what really matters. Yes, we can always search and end up with like pages and pages of results for case studies. But what is important is to go through those individual documents, try to understand and make sense of the insights that they have, and also then translate them back and communicate them back in a simple terms to a broader audience. And it's also important to look at both scientific literature, but also grey literature, because there's a wealth of information about transitions and transformations in government reports, reports from NGOs, documents in different scales of analysis. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. Karen made a point about the role that case studies could play in communicating benefits to the community, and then how that could change or mobilize action for transitions. And I was going to say that I 100% agree with that specific role of communicating co-benefits. And in fact, if you look at the sustainability transitions or food system transformation literature, there is many discussion around the role that winning coalition of actors could play to mobilize change. And one of the kind of stimulators for shaping this winning coalition of actors are basically these real stories, these tangible examples. So just these 2 points.
Okay. Thanks, Enayat. I think we should throw it open to the broader audience. We've only got about 7 minutes left, I think.
That's right. Thank you very much, everyone, for this. We're now at this point of the webinar where I switch off recording after the presentations and the discussion to open up to the floor. And so stop the recording.